great silent majority.
Conservative isn't just a word. It's a movement, a way of life.
And secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
The Conservative Roundtable discusses the conservative movement at the local, state, and national level. Here's your host, Ralph Larigo, chairman of the Erie County Conservative Party on 1270 The Patriot.
Welcome back, everyone. I want to let everyone know that we actually have a Conservative Party picnic this afternoon between 2 and 5 o'clock. So Russ Gugino has headed off the picnic. So, Russ, why don't you tell the audience what we've got going, welcome them to be able to come. It's not too late to come to the picnic.
So as Ralph said, it's 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. today at Kentucky. So a lot of people know where it is, but I'll tell you, if those who don't know, it's 4685 Seneca Street off of Union, and it's a great place. It's $50. You get a half chicken, and you get a lot of entertainment for your kids. Kids eat free. Now, if you're a conservative, and no one's going to check your registration, so if you say you're a conservative, you're going to pay only $40. So you'll get plenty to eat. The kids will have all the hot dogs and refreshments that they want. But we're also going to have things for the kids, including horseback riding and a magic show and a football toss and face painting. And Jimmy the Balloon Guy will be there, making animals out of balloons. And this is going to be a very family-friendly event. It's a great day for a picnic. And if you've got $40, come on by and tell everybody you're a conservative. And there'll be an awful lot of political people there, public officials like Senator George Borrello and Pat Gallivan and a number of others will be there. So by all means, come on over to Kentucky's and have a great time with your family.
Yeah, we did this last year for the first time, and it's a great family situation. You got to bring the kids. Hopefully you got kids to be able to bring. They get pony rides, face painting, clowns, the balloons. There's so much going on, and the weather's going to be perfect. So 2 to 5, Kentucky's, Seneca Street, West Seneca. All right, we have a call in from Robert from West Seneca. So, Robert, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for having me. Governor Hochul and the liberal policies like cashless bail, the disregard for the rule of law, and activist district attorneys have jeopardized the safety of citizens, particularly in New York City. How can we protect Western New York to avoid becoming New York City 2.0?
Oh, that's a great question, and thank you for that, Robert. You know, when you hurt your knee, what the doctor usually tells you the best thing to do is to try and strengthen everything around the knee, something, right? And that's what we need to do here. We need to strengthen everything outside of New York City, because New York City, is about to, I think, go down a road that they cannot recover from with the socialist Mamdani. And then you look at everyone else that's supporting him, even outside New York City. So, again, I'll say what I said before. For those of you that look at your state legislators and say, well, I hate the rest of them, but my guy's okay, as far as the Democrats go. The Democrats vote in lockstep. Okay, I have been in the state legislature for 6 years. I've been a senator for 6 years. And all those bills that they say, well, I voted no on that bill. So it never changes the outcome. And the system is rigged. The corruption in New York state government is literally baked into the cake here in New York, because the party in charge, which is the Democrats, controls everything. I've been in the state legislature for 6 years. I have seen thousands upon thousands of bills pass in the New York state legislature. Ask me how many Democrat bills have failed on the floor of the Senate since I've been there. None. It's predetermined. So there's only one solution. We need to restore balance in our government. And one-party rule has been an unmitigated disaster. So again, I don't care what you're registered. If you're independent, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, you should want to restore balance in our state government. And that means ending one-party rule.
Well, thank you for that. Let's get back a little bit. I still want to talk about these correction officers and Kathy Hochul taking the position that, first of all, she fired 2,000 correction officers, and then she doubled down on these 2,000 fired correction officers by saying that they're prohibited from any state employment. These are well-trained individuals. that sacrifice so much to work for the state of New York, and after firing these individuals, after taking away their health care, then she prohibits them from state employment? How can this possibly be?
Once again, she's in complete violation of just basic civil rights when it comes to the corrections officers, and certainly numerous Department of Labor regulations. So she's allowed to do that because no one in the Democrat Party that's in charge is going to hold her responsible. And I mentioned before, the Democrats are sitting back and letting this fire burn. They are watching Kathy Hochul and the Department of Corrections and their complete incompetence and hoping that this just implodes the system. As I said before, I'm not kidding. They want to see the elimination of prisons in New York State. This Communities Not Cages group is a real group. They are in Albany every week. They have a lot of support from the progressive Democrats, and their mission statement is to eliminate long-term incarceration in New York State. My Democrat colleagues and the governor would love to see us be the first state to eliminate prisons in the country.
So, I mean, because she fired all these people, she's put the National Guard. The National Guard is still in the prisons. Isn't that true?
That's correct, and that has created more problems than it's solved. First of all, these are soldiers that have been deployed now to our prisons instead of where they should be. And in most cases, they've been taken away from their jobs. These are part-time people, essentially that have to leave their job, leave their families in many cases to be deployed into our prisons. And unfortunately, the proliferation of contraband is at record levels. And these they're just kind of in some ways they're just window dressing for the government.
They have no training.
No, exactly.
They're not certainly trained for this type of situation. Prison training is intensive, and that's not where they got their training. And so we have a lot of problems with National Guard trying to guard prisoners. Isn't that the case?
That's correct. Again, no training, and this is a dangerous job to begin with. And so they're limited as to what they can do as a result. And unfortunately, we've had some cases recently now where we have had 2 arrests at Collins for National Guard members who have brought contraband in and sold it to prisoners. There's been two arrests, and I'm told more to come. Certainly not an indictment of all National Guard members, but it just makes you realize that this is not a sustainable solution. And by the way, by her own admission, her own budget director said, back at the height of this, it was costing New York taxpayers $100 million a month for this.
Ralph, if I can jump in. Last week we had Sheriff Garcia on, and we learned from the sheriff last week that this Hochul problem that was created when she fired these 2,000 correction officers is now hitting the pocketbook of Erie County taxpayers. The sheriff told us last week that when these individuals are convicted, and as the sheriff referred to it, they're state ready, meaning they're ready to go to the state prison, that's not happening because the state prison doesn't have the correction officers that they once had because she fired them. And what's happening, instead of staying in the Erie County Holding Center for 5 or 6 days, they're now staying here for 150 days, and Erie County taxpayers are picking up the tab for their, obviously for their housing, their food, their medication. That's now being borne by Erie County, not New York State. Again, Kathy Hochul is passing the burden back to the local governments, as most liberal Democrats do. They find somebody else to pay the bill. But we're paying the bill now for keeping these prisoners in our local jail when they should be in Attica.
And Bob, that's happening in counties across the state, including the counties I represent. This has become their burden. And by the way, they're in no hurry to change that, right?
Right.
And also, when you have a violation of a parole violation or probation violation, and those folks, instead of going back to state prison, end up in our local county jails also.
Well, the other thing is we're not hearing from our county executive, Mark Poloncarz, another liberal Democrat, or our county controller, Kevin Hardwick, who's his lapdog anyway. Why aren't we hearing that in Erie County, that Erie County's picking up the tab for these individuals that ought to be in a state prison, and the state of New York ought to be picking up that tab? Another burden on Erie County local taxpayers.
Because it's Democrats covering for Democrats.
That's right,
That is what it is. So, look, I want to shift a little bit, but it's not very far different. It's the Hochul giveaways to get elected. So I certainly, see it on a regular basis. I read it in the news, although I try to avoid the Buffalo news. But where are the giveaways? What's this inflation refund check that cost us $3 billion?
It's a total joke. I mean, this is Kathy Hochul wants to make New York more affordable, so she says. So she's going to hand you a check for $200. And by the way, by the time you pay for the postage and the administration, the writing the checks, that $200 check is probably going to cost taxpayers, $20 of that $200 check in addition to that. And this is in spite of the fact that she has at her fingertips the ability to reduce the cost of Medicaid, like we talked about. She's increasing the cost of everything in New York State, including electricity. Look how our electricity rates have gone up. That $200 is a slap in the face to New Yorkers, but it's going to cost taxpayers $3 billion, while she's wringing her hands over losing $750 million from the federal government and saying she's going to kick people off Medicaid as a result. Well, then how about not give out those those rebate checks and instead make New York more affordable, reduce our electricity rates by returning to energy independence here in New York State. Going back and looking at all the harmful policies that her and her Democrat colleagues have done that raised the cost of everything. This electric mandate that is going to cost New Yorkers thousands of dollars per family starting next year. How about eliminating some of those things instead of this, this shameful attempt to bribe people with a check for $200?
George, we mentioned this off the air, but I'll say it. I'm amazed that unions in New York State have allowed Kathy Hochul to trample on the union that is representing prison guards. I don't understand why there is not more outrage among unions about how she's treating union members.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you certainly see a lot of empathy, but yeah, I there were many that did not speak up. But I will say this though. I think that certainly the rank and file members of our labor unions are realizing now the Democrat Party is not their friend. The leadership of a lot of those unions is beholden to the Democrat Party for so many things and so many reasons. But even that is shifting. We have seen many folks, I'm proud to say, proud union members, skilled trades especially, that are starting to realize that the key to their success and prosperity and the quality of life for their members is to support Republicans and the Republican Party. I mean, how do you call yourself the party of labor, the Democrat Party, when you are essentially saying we want a free flow of cheap labor in the form of illegal immigrants streaming across our border, along with all the other dangerous things that occur, so that these non-union contractors can show up at a Home Depot parking lot and pick up a day laborer, pay him under the table? How is that supporting the skilled trades? How is that supporting the hardworking members of labor? It's not. But that is one of the foundations of the Democrat Party. What do they always say? Who's going to pick your crops? Who's going to clean your toilets? Who's going to stay out of Home Depot parking lot? This is a Democrat battle cry. The support of cheap labor under the table, which undermines certainly the values of organized labor.
It certainly has trickled down. I mean, the residents of Cheektowaga, normally 6-1 Democrat controlled, the residents of Cheektowaga, when the illegal immigrants invaded Cheektowaga, went to their hotels. I mean, Cheektowaga's done an about face. They finally realized, and now on our Cheektowaga board, for the first time in decades, we have 5 Republican-endorsed conservatives on that board out of 7. It's an amazing turnaround, and a lot of it is because of the actions of what Democrats do. They think there's no repercussions. There are repercussions, and I think it's going to be seen next year. But Democrats still try to, enhance themselves. For example, the voter access innovations that they want to call it, early voting, voting by mail, absentee voting without cause. All these things open to fraud. Can you speak a little to those kind of issues?
Yeah, 100%. We talked earlier about the corruption in redistricting that the Democrats have engaged in, but also they continue to sacrifice the security of our elections under the guise of voter access. And yet they have yet to produce in New York State a voter that has been disenfranchised. Show me somebody who said, I really wanted to vote, I tried to vote, and I couldn't. They can't produce that victim, but they continue to push this idea. Even when the people of New York State have spoken out and said no. Back in 2021, I believe it was, when they put on the ballot this idea of no excuse absentee ballots. The people of New York rejected that. They said, no, we don't want to have this glut of people voting by mail when they can very easily show up on one of the 10 days that you have to vote. So what did Democrats do after the people of New York State said no, after that change to our state constitution was defeated? Well, they played a loophole. They said we're going to allow early voting by mail. Potato. Even the Wall Street Journal and many others, even some I would say pro-Democrat media publications called this out as just an egregious violation of the rule of law.
It clearly is egregious. We're going to get to it back in another couple of minutes. So we have a caller, someone who I have a great deal of respect for. So Joel, how are you today?
Well, Mr. Chairman, you're doing a great job. Great job.
You there, Joel?
Yes, I am.
I hear him. Here.
Okay. So you have a question for us?
I do, Mr. Chairman. It's addressed to Senator Borrello. It's on the issue of bail reform. Just allow judges to lock up or detain a defendant because the judge, he or she, believes that individual is a danger to the community. You can correct me on this, but I believe New York State may be the only state that doesn't allow judges to do that. Our sister state of New Jersey, liberal democratic state, I believe they have it there. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a domestic violence case where a gentleman goes over and he abuses, assaults his spouse. He's arrested, he's charged. There's an order of protection issued, meaning he's not allowed to go there. If he does, he's held in contempt. 2 weeks later, he's back doing the same thing again. They lock him up. He's released on bail. A few weeks later, he comes back. He does the same thing again. And the way things are with the bail laws, they may allow him out again. This way, if a judge had discretion to lock that person up, the judge would say, you are a danger to the community, particularly to this individual. I'm going to lock you up. I'm going to detain you. There is no bail. The federal courts have had this system for years. The defendant's entitled to a hearing where he can challenge the detention. If he loses, he can appeal. But I think this is one way around the so-called revolving door where people are arrested and for violent crimes, and they have a record, a long record. And after they're arrested, they're back at it again. So, Senator, I'd just like to hear your response. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Joel, thank you very much for calling in, and certainly you are a legend and an expert in this field. And you're 100% correct. New York State is the only state that does not give judges discretion to hold someone on the basis of dangerousness or their prior criminal record. This was done, again, once we had one-party rule here in New York State, and they did the so-called criminal justice reforms. I always put reforms in air quotes because it's made New York State far more dangerous. And the bail laws do exactly what you said. And we've debated this. We've debated this time and time again. It's one of a myriad of situations where New York State has become less safe as a result of the pro-criminal revolving door justice system that we have in New York State, thanks to the Democrats in charge and Kathy Hochul. And I've debated this to the point where I kind of cornered one of the sponsors of the bill on the floor of the Senate and about why we would not allow judges to have this discretion to hold someone. And the final, retort, if you will call it, on their side was, how do you define dangerousness? In other words, they don't trust judges to be able to properly evaluate a career criminal who's committed heinous acts of crime as to whether or not that person is dangerous to society and should be held. That's the Democrats' final judgment on this. And it is absolutely egregious. They have shown time and time again that their social justice war is their number one priority. And all of us, all the new victims that they've created because of Kathy Hochul and Democrats, pro-criminal laws, those new victims are just acceptable casualties in this social justice war. It's absolutely outrageous. And this is the clearest example of it. The fact that we will not allow judges the discretion to hold someone based on how dangerous they are to society.
You know, this morning's paper, Joel, I don't know if you saw it, they criticized James Gardner because he talked about the murder that took place from someone that if bail reform wasn't in effect, that person would have been in jail, and hopefully that murder never would have been committed. But even in the modification of bail reform, they have set up so many rules for judges. If judges want to place bail, they have to jump through all kinds of hoops. They have to do all kinds of additional things, and it just doesn't happen anymore. In the past, a judge was able to use his discretion as to whether or not someone should be placed incarcerated to protect the citizenry. That just doesn't happen at this point. Isn't that true?
Is he still with us? Is Joel still with us?
Joel, are you still with us?
No, he's off.
Okay.
He's listening to us.
All right, but that unfortunately is the case.
That is the case.
In order for judges to place bail, there's so many instances where judges have no discretion whatsoever in order to place bail. But even where they have modified to an extent and allow judges some discretion, that discretion comes with a whole lot of additional work, a whole lot of qualifications that aren't necessarily there in front of the court.
100%. And this is probably the greatest threat to public safety, is you have judges now whose hands are tied. We just had a tragic example here in Western New York. A woman that was killed because a career criminal was released, and after he throttled her, choked her, was released again. You have there was a story recently of up in the northern part of the state. Where a convicted child molester was released on $1 bail. $1. That's what a child rapist is worth to the Democrats in New York State. $1.
Amazing. But now, look, we're going to shift over to the fact that we have a chance to correct this major problem next year. So next year, 2026, we have an election for governor. So Kathy Hochul's approval rating has constantly been below 50%. That's normally death for an elected official. Somehow she manages to survive. Tell us what you think about the election next year.
Well, first of all, I'm hopeful that the people in New York State are going to wake up and they're going to see what's going on around them. Unfortunately, so many New Yorkers, millions of them, have chosen to vote with their feet, as they say, and they've left New York. New York State leads the nation for outmigration. More people have left New York State for greener pastures than any other state in the nation. So I hope that's a wake-up call to the folks, those of us that are left here. I love to hear from people that say, I don't get involved in politics, and I don't want, or you show up someplace where we don't want to talk about politics. And well, politics affects your life, and if you don't realize that, look at what's going on around you. Whether it's the cost of your energy bills, the cost of the food, the fact that you can't walk down the street, without seeing someone who's either shouldn't be on the street because they're mentally ill, and we've turned our streets into mental institutions. All these things that have destroyed the quality of life here in New York. But we do have an opportunity here. If we can elect a Republican governor, which I believe we can, even with the Democrats still having the majority, even in both houses, which our goal is certainly to take that away. But we did an important thing last year in 2024. We eliminated the Democrat supermajority in the state legislature by breaking the supermajority in the New York State Senate. As chairman of the Senate Republican Campaign Committee, I'm proud to have led that effort with with our leader, Senator Rob Ortt, and everyone else on the team. And that made it a very significant change. The Democrats do not have the ability to override a governor's veto on their own. They would have to have Republican votes. And if we can maintain that and grow that with a Republican governor, we can change. We can have major change here in New York State, and that's what the people of New York State, no matter what your political color is, should want.
Bob, go ahead, Bob.
Thanks, Chairman. You talk about people leaving the state. Ironically, last night I got an email from one of our Amherst Republican committee women. And she said, Bob, sorry, I've got to resign from the committee. My husband and I are leaving New York State.
Happens all the time.
And, it's not just New York State. And, Chairman, I think we can beat Kathy Hochul next year. But I'm going to bring it right back to the local level, the town that I'm chairman in, the town of Amherst. We have one-party rule there, Senator. And, for 12 years, we haven't been able to elect a Republican. We're going to do that this year with Dan Gagliardo, our candidate for supervisor. But in the town of Amherst, one-party rule, when you said it earlier in the show, it's almost like they're arrogant, and they do what they want to do. It's like you said, Chairman, Democrats covering for Democrats. Right. Well, it happens in Amherst every day, and it gets worse, and I'll get to that in a second. But in Amherst, we've had an all-Democratic town government. They raised taxes 2 days after the last local election by 11.4%, and they got away with it. They're not going to get away with it this year because we're going to remind voters. They've also increased spending in Amherst to $200 million. I believe that is higher by far than any other town in the state of New York. And they spend $179 million a year on their budget. They don't care. They just take it for granted that they're going to continue in power. And the county executive, Mark Poloncarz, 3 of the Democratic town board members are commissioners or hold high appointed positions from Mark Poloncarz, and they're members of the Amherst Town Board. Who's running Amherst? Is it Erie County Democrats? I don't know. The voters ought to ask themselves that. And the independents, the blanks, and the Democrats in the town of Amherst ought to ask themselves, who is running the town of Amherst? Is it Erie County? Because 3 of the town board members are appointees of Mark Poloncarz, and they're on our town board. And they take our town for granted. They don't believe the Republicans are going to fight. We're fighting this year. We're not only fighting, I'll go this far. We're fight, and we're going to win.
Bob, I know your type, how you organize. I expect Amherst is going to turn like Lancaster has, like Hamburg has, like West Seneca has, like Cheektowaga has. We're finally going to realize, and we're going to affect it in Amherst. Polls show that more than half of New Yorkers feel that New York is headed in the wrong direction. More than half. Only 37% think New York is headed in the right direction. So there's a cry for change. The question is, how do we accomplish that change? Hochul's favorabilities are underwater, 42 to 47%. Yep. You can't be an elected official, that's what we've always believed, and be that far underwater and be successful. The majority of voters, again, in polls say they want someone else. Yep. But Hochul's going to be the candidate. She's got $17.5 million at this point in her war chest. Since January of this year, January of 2025, she's raised $4.4 million. And I say she does that by pandering to state workers, to state contractors that have to deal with the state. She goes and panders to those people. She gives them, state jobs, and she gets the money back. Isn't that what's happening?
Yeah. State contracts.
Yeah,
state contracts.
And you've seen articles. There was just an article in the Times Union about the big 3 accounting firms, national accounting firms, big 4, that how much they've donated to Kathy Hochul's campaign and what they've gotten in return. How can we all forget this company that out of New York City that had never sold a COVID test in their lives, that sold, that got a multi-billion-dollar contract from Kathy Hochul to sell us these, to sell us these COVID tests. Never sold one before, and paid far above what the market rate should have been. These are the paybacks
the front page of the Buffalo News yesterday talked about the Big 4, Senator, and one of the Big 4, 108 state, the big multi-millions, hundreds of millions of dollars donated to state Democrats, and they indicated that this one company got 108 state contracts. It's called pay to play. And we're seeing that in Amherst, too. And we're going to talk about that in this upcoming campaign.
Yep, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Again, if you want to call in, the number is 716-500-1270. Feel free to make that call, 716-500-1270. Look, we're going to talk more about what happens next year, what we want to happen next year, in terms of the election. So here's what happened 3 years ago when Lee Zeldin ran against Kathy Hochul. So Kathy Hochul had 3,140,415 votes to Lee Zeldin's 2,762,581. That is Zeldin was only down less than 400,000 votes. He was actually down 377,834 votes. If you look at a map of New York State, you will see that Kathy Hochul only won 5 counties. 57 counties were red. 57 counties. So this shows you how New York City controls the vote in New York. I mean, Assemblyman Dave DiPietro has many times brought up the cause for trying to separate New York City from the rest of New York, which would certainly be beneficial to the rest of us. But that's what we have. We have a state where the majority of territory, 57 counties, are really red. And you see this exact same thing in the Trump election, where the great majority of the rural areas, the people that are hardworking ethnic people that are out there, are voting our cause, are voting conservative Republicans. And what happens is the cities overwhelm that vote. And it's not because city people don't understand or realize. There are certainly lots of the good people in the city, but the Democrats pander by giveaways to these people, and they feel obligated to keep that going. But we're going to change that. We're going to change it next year. So, again, what we have candidates next year, Elise Stefaniak, I think is going to be an excellent candidate. What do you think?
Absolutely, Chairman. I mean, next year it'll be an interesting race, too. It'll be the first time there are 2 candidates running for governor, both major parties, both upstate New York. That's never happened before, and both female. But, you saw what Elise Stefanik did at the congressional hearing about a month ago.
Yep.
When Kathy Hochul had to come in. Go ahead, Chairman.
Yeah, she was fantastic. She asked her questions that Hochul just didn't know how to answer. So when Elise Stefanik has a debate with Hochul, she's going to wipe the floor with Kathy. I mean, Kathy just is not deep.
I agree with you.
She really doesn't get it.
Kathy Hochul's motto is, "We do because we can." Now, when you think about that, that's not much of a motto. You do things because you can, or you should do things because you should. And one point that George Borrello was making that I'd like to emphasize is this. People talk about the outward migration of people from New York. Let me give you an example. In the Wall Street Journal the other day, it talked about, in the last 5 years, 230,000 people left New York, primarily for Florida, Texas, and Tennessee. Just to give you an example what that means, that's a big number. That's almost the population of the city of Buffalo. Buffalo was 260,000, by the way. But in addition to that, they took with them $14 billion. When you do the math and you do the division, that's $125,000 per person left New York permanently. That is a tremendous blow to our tax base, and it also means that the people who are left are going to have to pick up the slack, and that's you and me.
You know, Russ, I gotta chime in. I got a text sent to me this week, and it was photoshopped. I got to admit that to your listeners. It was photoshopped, but it was a picture of Kathy Hochul standing on a beach in Florida with a group of people behind her, and she was holding a plaque, and the plaque said, Florida State Realtor of the Year.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that. You know, a lot of people are leaving the state for lower tax states, and the people in this state happen to have the unusual distinction of paying the highest taxes in the country. One other thing I wanted to mention about Lee Zeldin, you mentioned, Ralph. People don't realize that on Election Day, Lee Zeldin beat Kathy Hochul. He got more votes on Election Day than she did.
It was the paper ballot stuff that the Democrats allowed to happen.
Bingo. So, and we've got to have people register Republican, conservative, or independent, but vote Republican and conservative.
We got to get Republicans to start to understand that early voting is important. If you got an opportunity to vote early, vote early. What happens if you get called out of town at the last minute? Or, God forbid, what happens if you become ill and you can't show up on Election Day? Republicans, you got to vote early. That's what the Democrats convinced their voters to do, and we have to do a better job at it. And I think we did last year. Definitely did last year. I mean, Trump was he drove that very hard in all of his rallies. But Republicans, vote early.
And by the way, if you want to also continue this kind of a conversation later on today, I want to remind you that from 2 to 5, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. today at Kateki's, the Conservative Party of Erie County, with Chairman Ralph Larigo, will have a really terrific picnic of half a chicken and a lot of food and free hot dogs for the kids and a lot of things for the kids to do. Your kids are free. Come on out at Kateki's at 4635 Seneca Street and have a great time with conservatives and talk the issues with us. We'll all be there.
What we need in terms of this election, when you look that Zeldin was only less than 400,000 votes short, what that really spells out is who do we need to get to? Who needs to vote that doesn't vote at this point? Gun owners. Unfortunately, we have millions of gun owners in the state of New York. Millions. And if those gun owners voted, this state would be totally red. I understand gun owners. Maybe you don't want to be on the radar somehow, but this is in your own best interest. It's something that's so critically important to New Yorkers. There are other non-voting groups that are, they go to work every day. They want to support their family. They think politics is bad because it is, in fact, a blood sport. You hear bad things about each side, but you've got to vote your pocketbook. You've got to vote what your family needs. And your family needs less taxes, less government interference, less regulation. Your family, if you've got kids, you don't want them to go away to college and then stay away because it's better somewhere else than New York. You want them to come back. You want your grandkids here with you. I'm fortunate. My 3 kids are all here. My 6 grandchildren are here. But so many clients of mine, that's not the case. Their children are in different states. Their grandchildren, they only see at Christmas time or maybe a birthday. It's critical that we do something about it, and we have the opportunity. The opportunity comes next year. So, look, my opinion, and I've talked to Bobby Ann Cox. We talked about her before. Bobby Ann Cox is an attorney downstate. She's a crusader, though, and she fought with Senator Borrello on the quarantine issue. I believe that Elise Stefaniak should hire Bobby Ann to go around the state and register and encourage voting. Everybody needs to get out and vote. I can't say it often enough. I can't say it strong enough. Bob, isn't that the problem that we have?
Absolutely the problem. We got, Republicans, especially in our case in Amherst too, Ralph. I mean, we're down 13,000 enrollments of the Democrats, and we have got to get a higher percentage of our Republicans out to vote this year. If that's a must. It's got to happen next year in the governor's race. But, you just rattled off all those issues that represent a stark contrast between the Democrats and Republican conservatives. There's one issue that you left out, public safety.
Yep.
Look at the difference between the Democrats, especially what's going on in New York City with Mondani, and they're not socialist, communist. And you look at other Democrats across the state, the nation. Democrats talk about defunding the police. In Amherst last week, there was a report that car thefts are up tremendously over previous years. In Amherst was at one time the safest community in America.
That's right.
I mean, let's stop this. People got to pay attention. The Democrats don't support law enforcement. Kathy Hochul fired 2,000 correction officers in New York State. There is a major difference in the issues you articulated, Mr. Chairman, and the issue of public safety and law enforcement. Republicans are pro-law enforcement, pro-public safety. The Democrats, and you can look at them, and they're turning more and more to the left, more and more socialist, and now we got a communist running for the mayor of the city of New York.
And when we say this, when we say Democrats, I don't want to lump everybody together because I've said 1,000 times, it's not whether you have an R or a D in front of your name. It's what you believe in. It's what your basic values are. It's what you want for your children that's important. And I believe everybody Everybody wants the best for their children. Everybody wants their children and their grandchildren here. Everybody wants a job for their children and their grandchildren. But everybody, as Bob has said, everybody wants safety for their children. They want to be able to go out in their neighborhoods. They don't want to be able to, or they don't want to be able to be afraid when they go out. They want to be able to walk safely. They want to be able to park their car in their driveway without having to lock it up or put it in their garage. That's unfortunately what we've lost in our society, because this is a society controlled by, and using the broad word Democrats is something, it's controlled by socialistic Democrats. It's controlled by the downstate Democrats that are far to the left, those willing to call themselves socialistic Democrats. That's where the fight is. It's not you Democrats that want to go to work every day, want to support their family. You know, you're a Democrat because you belong to a union or your parents were Democrats. It's not you. But you do have to realize that voting the party line can and is at this point a mistake. We need balance in New York. The only way we get balance in New York is we have to change. We have to change this state. When we had a two-party system in this state, we were all so much better off. When we had the Republicans control the Senate, the Democrats control the Assembly, there was give and take. There's no give and take anymore. Everything is on a continuum, and the question is, where does the bill show up on that continuum? Is it far to the right? Is it far to the left? Is it in the center? And unfortunately, over the last several years, since Democrats have had control of both houses and the governorship, it is far to the left. No one really wants that. We all want the best for our family. We all want safety for our family. We all want individual responsibility as opposed to governmental responsibility. We need to get involved in order to do that, and each and every one of you need to be involved.
You know, Ralph, it comes back to what you said a minute ago, voter turnout. You know, last year in Amherst, 76% of the voters turned out in the presidential race. Right now in a local election year, probably 44, 47, 48% are going to turn out. People got to understand, local government impacts their life more than what happens at the national level. Local government is about public safety, law enforcement. It's about your property taxes. In local government, we got to get people to turn out to vote in a local election year like they do in a presidential, because local government has more impact on your family than you imagine.
All right. Well said. Look, everyone, I know we're preaching to the choir on this channel, but it needs to be said to your friends and your family. All right, we need a hard break.